Okay, everybody. I guess we got a couple of people here. This is the first time that I've ever done this live streaming for something. So we're going to set the bar really low. The information should be good. I'm already kind of discovering that looking at this looks like it's all backwards. So unless you can watch in a mirror somehow, this may be somewhat difficult. So I guess I'll talk a little bit first about what the OPT model is, what it is generally meant to do, and really as a personal trainer, how do we think about using the OPT model as a tool in order to support our business, which is to kind of get people from where they're at to where they need to go. So the human body biologically adapts and responds to things that freak it out. So the basic characteristic of most, or if not all, biological systems is to adapt to stressors. So from an exercise physiology standpoint, they're going to be going for adaptations to stress. In a gym scene, we would call those gains or attaining a goal. But the way a personal trainer needs to go about thinking about attaining a goal is to think about what kinds of adaptations we ultimately want to set up. So as you can maybe see here a little bit, it says here the OPT model, the general purpose of the OPT model is a systematic way to induce harmonious adaptations on a human being in a way that is a safe way for human beings to adapt. So a human being can do a lot of different things, and when they call it good at it, it doesn't necessarily lead to a beneficial change. It can lead to a maladaptation. So things like stress fractures or certain metabolic diseases are going to be how the body responds to those kinds of stressors. And sometimes, if not all times, metabolic disease is just not really fun to have. It will ruin a weekend, to put plainly. So what we want to do is see how can we kind of create a stimuli that is going to be a way that the human body is supposed to adapt, but also in a way that can kind of carry us forwards. Another way to think about it is most people have a gain or a goal that is like being a senior in high school. They want to graduate high school, but they're actually starting in first grade. Now, what we could do is take a first grader and put them into a senior class for 12 years. That'll be really hard. Maybe some first graders are going to be able to learn some of the things along the way, but there's going to be a lot of gaps. It's just easier if you figure out, okay, what is the goal? Graduate high school. And that could be like lose weight, gain weight, improve performance. But then we'll have to assess where that person is beginning. And maybe they have like a math or English ability that is more like first grade. So we'll go first grade, second grade, third, fourth, fifth, and we'll just climb all the way up. So that's kind of from a conditioning standpoint, cognitive standpoint. We're just going to be looking at it from a physiologic standpoint. And so that's where it's kind of nice to look at the OPT model and how it's presented with its levels and phases. And they're not just representing certain training styles, they're representing ways in which the human body can adapt. It just so happens that the human body adapts to certain stressors. Therefore, the OPT model and its benefits ultimately has the characteristics that leads you to those benefits. And that takes us to kind of the next step in just understanding general programming, not just the OPT model, but generalized programming. So if we're talking about adaptation, that is just going to be the body's ability to change so that whatever was initially challenging is just less challenging. A really good example of this could be tanning. So if we're outside and it's sunny, we're going to have lots of sunshine coming down, and that's going to be in the form of electromagnetic radiation. Some of that stuff is really not that bad on the body, but some of the stuff is of higher energies, like the ultraviolet radiation. So the UV rays coming down hitting the skin could be bad for the skin cells. It's just too much energy, and that can end up causing perhaps skin cancer. So our skin has the ability to darken its hue. It will release melanin. And so the darker skin has the ability to absorb more of these ultraviolet rays. And so that allows us to then be outside for the same amount of time with less risk and or be outside for a longer period of time. So that change, decreasing the amount of stress hitting the body, allows for a higher level of resilience, and that has utility one way or another. So we're just going to look at it from a physiologic perspective. So there are a lot of principles to help somebody change. If you can't see this forwards or backwards, the first one is going to say overload. So we'll talk about a little bit of the principle of overload, talk about the principle of specificity, and then also the principle of progression. Because the big thing is you can have a piece of paper that has lots of exercises, and we could call it stabilization endurance or strength endurance or things like that. We can call it whatever we want. And it may actually cause the person to get tired at the end. But we can't just look at fatigue or sweating or a lot of breathing as just saying, well, if you're experiencing this, therefore you're absolutely going to get the change that you want. Soreness is not going to be a good way to dictate the effectiveness of a program, because if you get into a car accident and have whiplash, doesn't mean you're going to get hypertrophy of the upper traps. It just means you're kind of injured. We also don't want to look at burning as a sign, you know, muscles or muscle groups burning as a sign of the program working, because that will be a side effect of a lot of molecular stuff going on inside of the muscle, not necessarily some of the stuff that leads you to the goals that you want. So when we look at a piece of paper, we'll have to kind of interpret all the exercises and numbers like reps, sets, intensity, and rests. Kind of think about, okay, if the person experienced this kind of a challenge, how will then the body move forwards? How will it adapt to that challenge? Is that easy? No, it's hard. It's really hard. But that's why you have a whole career to learn and get good at this. So I'm going to just kind of have a moment and erase this while I'm busy myself and you're watching me. Feel free to type in any questions and I can answer those. So let's see, where is it? So as mentioned, let's use a blue one. You know, when we're looking at principles of adaptation, how do we know that a program that we do will move us in a direction that we want? One of the things that we're looking at is what is termed overload. And so overload definitively means stressing a system beyond its current capacity. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean stress a person, because a person, we are a compilation of a lot of different systems. For example, a nervous system, skeletal system, muscular system, endocrine system, cardiorespiratory system, all different kinds of systems that need to kind of harmonically mix together. So what we want to do is stress a system beyond its current capacity. So the hard things when it comes to this is understanding the functions or the roles of the different systems of the body. So I know I have a muscular system, but what does it do? So then we can figure out what scenario or what about an activity or exercise can challenge it or stress it. One way to figure this out is, after understanding what is a system supposed to do, when does that system have an inability to do it again? So what's great about exercise to control this is we usually perform bouts of activity separated by bouts of recovery. It's like if you go on a very long drive, you will at some point run out of gas and then you have to refuel. It's just like a little bit of a break in between in order to recuperate. So if we have a number of sets of exercise, you want to get big and strong, and so you're going to do some bench press. Let's say you have some kind of a load on there. You have 135 pounds, and you say, I'm going to do this for 10 reps. And on the first time, you are able to generally do the 10 reps. The second time, it's going to be harder. Third time, harder. Fourth time, you're unable to do that same amount of load. So if you have an inability to complete that task, but recoverable with rest, that would be fatiguing. And fatigue is going to be a sign of overload. So there is a way that we can have a muscular fatigue, a neuromuscular, neurological fatigue, a cardiorespiratory fatigue, one way or another. Whatever you're doing when it comes to exercise, at some point, you got to get tired. So fatigue is going to be an inherent characteristic of appropriate overload. So this operates kind of on a Goldilocks principle. If it is not enough, a person will be challenged, but their body will be able to do it. And so they've accomplished the goal but it wasn't beyond a threshold enough for the body to then recalibrate. The other thing is, in just very light blue, I'm gonna have to throw this marker away, too much. So if we stress a system beyond, far beyond its capacity to fix itself, that's when we can ultimately hinder that system. And that could either be, a big problem like too much jumping and it causes stress fractures in, in your lower extremities, or like if you're trying to tan and you spend way too much time out in the sun, you could get a really bad sunburn, or upwards of, skin cancer, to be exceptionally dramatic. So somehow there's like this green zone where it's not too easy, where the person does the task and they kind of wince at it. Okay, what's next? It's not too hard where we're crushing the person, but there needs to be some kind of a just right. In order to figure out if the overload that is on the piece of paper is going to be actually being applied as intended, we as trainers need to, just look at the client, so we need to watch them, but we need to make observations. So by paying attention to things like their breathing rate or ability to kind of catch their breath, when we're looking at their ability to continue bouts of exercise, so are they able to complete the number of reps for each of these sets, but also from a neurological standpoint, is that person's posture breaking down? So when we're watching somebody exercise, there's going to be a number of things that we can look at that lets us know, what system is being challenged, as well as is it being challenged enough, but also not too much. And that then takes us to the next level. So how do we stress that, or what kind of stresses do we apply? I'm going to just speak abstractly a little bit. I like to use either car references, car analogies, or music analogies. I don't know how to play any music, but I've listened to music, so take this for what it's worth. If you wanted to learn to play piano, get better at playing piano, you can't really practice to get better at playing piano by playing guitar. Now, everybody would know this. If you want to get better at playing guitar, you have to play guitar. If you want to get better at playing piano, you got to play piano. So the manner by which you challenge yourself is also the manner by which you get better. Same thing when it comes to language. If you wanted to go to Japan and talk to people in Japanese, it would probably be beneficial if you learn Japanese. If you were learning Spanish, you will get very good at Spanish. It will not help you in Japan unless there's a very small community of Spanish-speaking Japanese people. If you find that, please let me know. I'm sure on Reddit someone will figure it out. So we have this principle of, in probably backwards, very light blue writing, I apologize, specificity. And here's what's kind of cool. If we were to say, okay, learn the drums, learn piano, learn guitar, well, what is similar, what is different? So one thing that is similar is you have to move. So when it comes to piano, you gotta do things with your fingers in your hands. When it comes to playing trumpet or clarinet or guitar, you have to do things with your hands. But there are different movements that you have to do. So we can look at what is similar from instrument to instrument or from exercise to exercise, but we could also look at what is different. So if we're able to kind of deconstruct the inherent parts of a movement and a challenge, then we can reconstitute it in an exercise scenario. So we can just make sure that however you're exercising in a challenged way, when you get better at it, it'll have the carryover benefits that you want. So when it comes to specificity, there is an acronym, which is going to be the SAID principle. And because I'm lazy and I don't want to fill it all out, SAID essentially stands for specific adaptation to impose demands. So you will change specifically to how you are challenged. Now, and even though it says specific, it could be quite general. So if you do squatting exercises, then you get better at doing squats. It's not necessarily you only get good at squats in the gym. You get up and down out of a chair or do lots of squatting movements, you get a lot better at. But as people specialize in what they're doing, they may develop better adaptations or specific adaptations to the modality of exercise. So if somebody does squats with the barbell on their back, they will get better at it being on their back. They may not necessarily get much better if they held something in front. Versus if you had someone doing a front squat, and they end up optimizing in that direction, they may not be as good with the barbell on their back. So even though we have a general squatting pattern that both individuals can get better at, there's going to be some more micro specificities. I just made that up. I have no idea if that's a real thing. Micro specificities that let us know if we start controlling more than one thing. If we try and say, hey, stance, maybe footwear, maybe what are you on? Are you standing on something that is firm or standing on something that is squishy? There's a lot of ways that we can kind of mold and nuance a lot of this specificity if necessary, where necessary. But basically, specificity, you will change specifically to how you are challenged. So there are three basic categories of specificity. So what is it about an exercise that your body will actually adapt to? So most activities are really going to be a combination of challenges for different parts of your body. So if you probably remember going through parts of your book, you have a human movement system, which is going to be a skeletal system. You have to move at the joints. You'll have a muscular system. They're going to have a responsibility of producing force for a certain period of time. And your nervous system has to coordinate it. So you have these three different systems that have their individual responsibilities, but they're going to be physically and functionally linked to each other. So your nervous system, your brain, is literally attached to your muscles physically, as well as it has to functionally listen to your body with information going up through sensory, but it also has to tell your muscles what to do. So that would be like a neuromuscular relationship, your mind-body relationship. As well, your muscles are going to be attached to your skeletal system through a bunch of fascia and primarily tendons. So with that specific attachment, when your muscles are challenged, your bones and your joints are also going to be challenged. So if your muscles get challenged in a certain way, your skeletal system will adapt based on that. But also if your bones and joints are going to be under some kind of stress, your muscles are going to be incorporated as well. Oh, we have a picture. What is this? Jordan, I only got half of that question there, but I'm curious what the second half is going to be. So if you can plug in another one. So specificities. On one end, we have a mechanical specificity. So this is going to be two things. We have what is the movement. That's going to be like the joint motion in a gross way. Is like, are you going to be doing a leg motion or an arm motion? But even when it comes to arms and legs, how are you moving? So like with learning guitar or learning piano, you both have to move your fingers, but you use your fingers in a different way than you do with guitar than you do with piano. So one of the things that you adapt to is how you move. It'll smooth out. The other thing is going to be the load that is present. So how heavy is the movement that is being performed? Okay, let me see here. Oh my God, Jordan, that is a really good question, but that is a big question. So how do you better explain to clients the relationship between motor control, proprioception, and actual strength training? Okay, so here's how do you explain, I know, because this is like a lot of complicated terminology. And then how do you maybe communicate some of these things or the values of it to someone that doesn't know that they even have hands? They probably drive cars. And so when we're trying to talk about motor control, there is going to be the ability of the driver inside of the vehicle. So there could be some people that have pretty good control over terrible cars, but there's also going to be people that have terrible control over great cars. So the motor control is going to be like the driver, the ability to make decisions with how to turn the wheel and then how to use the pedals. And there's also going to be then the performance of the car. And so there needs to be a merriment between your body control and your bodily efforts. You don't necessarily get one without the other. What we'll need to do is prepare and improve your control of a movement. And then once you improve the control of movement, then we can load that movement. So first we're going to show you how to drive simply, and then we will show you how to race around a track. And it's just better in that order. The proprioceptive thing, that's just another way of saying kind of like body awareness. So how do you know where your body is without looking at it? If you want to just squeeze more car analogies, that's going to be like being in the car and you're going to try and get into a parallel park into a spot, or trying to get out of a park, of a spot that you parallel parked into. You need to kind of be aware of the dimensions of your vehicle without actually seeing it. So a lot of individuals will move, and hopefully I'm going to arrange this back to your question, but a lot of individuals will not think about how they're moving. That's actually a nice thing about how we move. You don't have to constantly think about it. But if the person has poor body awareness for any number of reasons, they might put their body into a position that is just not advantageous, safe, or helpful. So what we'll need to do is kind of take, with training, active measures of paying attention to your body so that later on you don't have to think about those things. So we're almost trying to do, by having somebody stand on a single leg or be on something that's more unstable, like a half foam roller, or adjust their, sorry, that was a little burp. I had these amazing tacos from this taco truck just outside. It's turning into a little bit of a problem. So if you see me burp a little bit, it's for good things. So I hope that answers your question a little bit. Very diversified question, but it's a lot of neurological stuff that most clients are going to have a tough time thinking about. But they just need to understand that we need to improve your body awareness and body control first to a certain amount, whatever that is. And then we can load that movement if we want more strength. We can endure that movement if we want endurance. And we can speed up that movement if we want power. But you need to have control before you develop ability. Okay, so that is just a very long-winded way to answer a very good question. So getting back to some of the specificities, we'll have the mechanical specificity, which is the movement and the load. So if we do pushing exercises, pulling exercises, overhead pressing or squatting, these are different movements. And if we are consistent with these movements, hopefully it will improve in control over time. So they will adapt to the movement, as well as whatever load that we are at. So if we're going to be training, let's say, pushing light, that person gets good at pushing light. If we do pushing heavy, they get good at pushing heavy. So there is a load attached to a movement, and that's the mechanical specificity. When we look at next, just to make it not too confusing, I am just reading a question. Makes a lot of sense. I think that having a hard time helping them realize why that matters for their goals. 90% of people want to lose fat and get toned. Yeah. I mean, this is going to be a really big uphill battle, which is how do we communicate the connection between, sometimes the distant connection between what we're doing with an exercise or with a session and how that helps them long term, and whether they buy in or not. Which is a term that is kind of put out there. In a little bit more background, yeah, a client is going to have certain they're going to have goals and wants, like I want to lose weight or, get ripped or whatever it is. They have their wants and needs. And then that may not be realistic, or they're talking about they're in first grade and they don't know it and they want to graduate high school. And then the trainer comes in, and we may start using words, the sciencey fun words that are impressive, but the person doesn't quite understand. And we may start engaging in exercise that they are not anticipating. So I've had a lot of clients come in and they say, I love just crazy exercise. I want to kind of die on the ground making sweaty snow angels. I want to do a lot of this power training. We will ultimately run an assessment, and based on that assessment, we find that they just are not ready for a lot of that stuff. So they want to do that crazy stuff, but the initial stuff to get them there is not what they want to pay for. And with clients that have expectations of exercise different than how initial exercise should look, that just in general is going to be hard. And it's our ability to communicate how, based on where they're at, using the assessment results. So it's not just us saying, hey, by the way, your knees are terrible. You look like an arthritic Labrador. They might find that insulting and say, no, I can do this stuff. We'll have to do the assessment, review the results of the assessment, and let them know, in order to do the power training, you need to move normally with your knees in line, and we're noticing your knees are not in line. So this needs to get fixed before you move on. Now, whether they take that bait or not, that's up for debate. They might just go to a trainer that's going to give them what they want, but not what they need. There could be fruitful ends with that, maybe not. So it's going to be up to you as a trainer to figure out a way to communicate some of that more complicated stuff to the client, somehow vet the process ahead of time, so you are getting clients that more or less know that they can't begin with the end. And so, Jordan, good luck with that. It's not an easy thing. So that was the mechanical specificity. The next thing is the neuromuscular specificity. You can kind of call this like a mind-to-body relationship. So some of the stuff that your brain has to do to control the body, because the body is just like a physiological, biological vehicle to take your brain and your genetics from point A to point B. Like your brain is just right in here, and it's just trying to go home, and it's trying to go get food inside of the body. So your body's just a vehicle. And so your brain has to control the vehicle in a certain way. One is going to be the speed of the movement. So your brain has to control how fast you move. Some people that are not used to moving perhaps too slowly because they don't have activities that require certain kinds of slow ginger movement. You know, think like you are, you go up on a step stool, you get something that is kind of heavy and precarious, like you reach above in your top cabinet and you're like, God, I hope I didn't put all of my knives in this box. You can't just take it and then drop it all the way down. You want to just very slowly kind of ease it down. So your brain has to control how fast or slow that you're moving. As well, your brain puts a limiter on how fast you can move. So for the vast majority of us, the maximal speed that we can move, either to swing our arms to run. I mean, this could either be running, this could be very, very vigorous maraca shaking. So whatever their speed is, if they can't move that fast, it's not because the muscles can't do it. It's because the brain does not know how to move the body that fast, or it's reluctant to because it's afraid that you're going to hurt yourself, because your brain doesn't really like you. It's kind of thinks that you're just very dangerous. So it'll prevent you from doing that. So power training can help increase the speed of the movement, and some stabilization stuff can teach the human body how to slow things down appropriately. So there's a neuromuscular specificity involved. And there's also speed specificity involved, as well as, I'm just going to put environment, because that's more or less what it says in the book. But if you are doing an exercise on different kinds of ground, asphalt, grass, sand, they all cause your body to move and contour in a different way. So the surface that you are on, the terrain that you're on, will also create a certain kind of a stress or challenge that your body will adapt to. I mean, I remember when I was a kid, just climbing a wall was just pretty easy. I was just kind of rambunctious and just like, okay, you have this wall, where do you put your hand and how do you present your body and do all that kind of stuff? And then many years later, I was just like, I did this, Spartan race, you have to climb a wall. And I was like, my body does not know how to do that. So the environment of the ground being all over the place and pretty wacky terrain was one way to kind of control the body. And then with that, the mechanical specificity of how do I move my body in an efficient way over the wall was just, honestly, it was a shit show. It was super hard. And it's not because I didn't have enough strength. It's because when I was training for the race, I was training indoors and on solid ground on a gym surface. And so my body and the lunging and the running and all that stuff was perfectly adapted to an environment that I was not ultimately going to be in. So there's going to be what is called the environment, and that's just going to be a lot of the surface and the terrain that your lower extremity and your foot and ankle complex will have to kind of contour, and then contour to, and then the rest of your body has to align against. So that's going to be the neuromuscular specificity. The last one, I am not going to go into detail whatsoever. I'll just call this chapter 4 in your textbook, is going to be a metabolic specificity. So probably backwards on this video, this is just going to be the energy pathway or pathways that you're going to be challenging. So without going into the creatine system, your ATP CP system, without getting into anaerobic glycolysis or your aerobic systems and all that fun stuff, the big thing is it's the intensity and duration of the movement. So some activities require very high intensities, like jumping as high as you can, throwing as far as you can, or running as fast as you can. So the harder you push yourself, the lower that period of time. And so if you keep on doing lots of sprint, 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 that is a challenge on not just the movement of running with your front and backside mechanics, the forces involved, the surface that you're going to be on, but it's also the intensity and duration. So if you're trying to do something that is a maximal intensity, that'll last for upwards of seconds. And this is why if someone wanted to do some long distance running, like a half marathon or full marathon, will they have to train themselves by running? Yes. So if they want to get better at running, they should not practice by swimming or cycling. It will not carry over the same way. And it's not just the surface. So if that person's going to be running on concrete, they may have to do some amount of conditioning on that surface to adapt to that body, but also metabolically. So we don't want them to practice their marathon running by sprinting. Now, even though the running is the same, the surface is the same, those specificities are the same, the intensity and duration is going to be significantly different. Now, it's not that most people are going to train for a marathon by doing sprints. Most people will intuitively disagree that is going to be a beneficial thing, but in a more microcosmic way, we can start talking about some of this stuff. Just to remind everyone, the reason that we've been going over principles of adaptation, which is overload, specificity, and then ultimately progression, is to help understand not just what the OPT model is, but it's the why we would want to apply certain phases at certain times. Because baked into some of these charts that have lots of numbers and weird names of exercises like skull crusher, why do I need to do skull crusher? Baked into all of that stuff, we really just have the basic grammar of these principles of adaptation. And so if we can just kind of see through that, like Neo in the Matrix, look past these numbers and acute variables and see what they are representing in terms of overloads and specificities, then we'll have a higher level of confidence with understanding what the OPT model is trying to do. It will allow us to have more conviction in sticking to a part of the model that we've said we've wanted to do. And if we have all of that, we should be able to communicate more confidently, not just what we're going to be doing with exercise to our client, but why we're going to do it in a particular way. So when we cue them, because it's needed, we say slow down, and they're not slowing down, and they say, well, it doesn't matter. We can say, well, it does matter because of the neuromuscular specificity. Not that you would say that, but you would have the conviction to start a conversation. Okay. Jordan, more questions? Anybody have more questions before I continue being weird on here? Okay, great. A little bit more weirdness. So now we're going to go into how, oh, I'm sorry, I have to also do progression. That's going to be kind of a simple one. I'm going to go to a green marker, see if that works a little bit better. So as I mentioned, when we have some specific overload on the body, we challenge certain systems or a combination of systems in a particular way, and we fatigue those systems in the way that we have challenged it, it'll ultimately get a little bit better. So part of, and you might find this in chapter 13, resistance training concepts, when going over the general adaptation syndrome, that in order to get a gain, it must start with a challenge, and then that follows some kind of a heal. So when we look at the general adaptation syndrome, we could just say, hey, we've got some kind of a baseline here. And if we apply overload there, what'll first happen is a brief fatigue. The system will not be able to do it again. Imagine some really hard leg training session that you did perhaps on a Monday because everybody was benching, and you felt sore the next day. You would probably not have the ability to do that same level of effort again. So you would need to take more time in order to heal. So you'll have a slight decline in your performance, and then it will return back to baseline, but you will end up also getting a supercompensation. So what happens is your fitness level will be a little bit higher than it was before. I'll just put a next there. And we call that a gain. So here was the stimulus. Maybe it was, 30 minutes out in the sun. The next day you were sunburned, and all of a sudden it just kind of sucks to put your shirt on and off. But then a couple of days later, you're a little bit darker. So what you'll want to do at this peak is raise the level of effort. Because in theory, the way that we're going about this model, if you gave yourself the same demand that you initially did, it will not be as challenging on the body because you have developed a little bit of resilience. So in order to get yourself kind of swinging up like this, what we'll do is plan a sequence of overloads over the course of weeks or months that will ultimately cause this this series of general adaptations in a fun way. It's great. Yeah. So instead of just saying I'm just going to keep on killing myself in the gym over and over again, that could potentially lead to an excessive overload over a period of weeks or months. May not be very good for the body. So what we'll say is, okay, for week 1, maybe we'll end up doing, just from a strength training standpoint, maybe we'll do 75% of your 1 RM. In week 2, we'll work at 80%. In week 3, we'll work at 85%. And then in week 4, we'll work at 90%. So we just plan an increase in overloads in order to schedule ourselves to move forward. So a program needs to progress. And so what a program does that we make is just an anticipated progression. One of my students just walked in for my advanced class. You can come down.
I didn't know if you were like.
I'm live streaming, so everybody can hear you.
How you doing?
That's fine. There you go. Okay, so as Johnny just kind of comes in. So that's what progression is. We don't want to do the same thing over and over again because it's not going to net us a different result, because whatever was an overload previously, after the adaptation, is no longer an overload. So somehow we're going to have to up the ante. So all of you that have done some kind of endurance training know this. If you're trying to run 10 miles nonstop, you run your first mile and you kind of crap out. And then the next time you do it, 1.5 miles, 2 miles, 3 miles, 4 miles. So what you're going to try and do is systematically overload the endurance abilities. So we add duration in that way, as opposed to we're going to be making you run 1 mile faster. That would be more like a speed strength thing. So there are a number of ways that we can set up some kind of a specific overload. And we just want to kind of stick on that kind of overload over a longer period of time. We don't want to just create random challenges, because that might just make somebody's physiology kind of do a little do-si-do back and forth. So that was just going over specificity, challenging your body in a way that you want to see a change. And some of those specificities is neuromuscular, metabolic, and mechanical. We also have the mentioned principle of overload. You have to stress the system beyond its current capacity. And now we also have progression. So a program should have all 3 of those kind of baked into some kind of an attempt. Well, how does that relate to the OPT model? I don't know. I just kind of made this stuff up as I'm going along. The OPT model, NASM did not invent power training. It did not invent strength training. It did not invent endurance training. And it didn't create, the model did not create these abilities for the human body to change. It's just a way of kind of organizing a program, perhaps, based on how human beings present performance in a hierarchical way. So your power is based on your strength is based on your stabilization. So let's kind of talk for a little bit as an example of phase 1, which is stabilization endurance. Another way to call or refer to stabilization endurance is you're going to control your motion for a long period of time. So I'm just putting here controlled duration. So if we want to improve how well someone can stay in control of their body for a long period of time, then that is exactly what we will need to challenge. So the nature of a stabilization program, if we're trying to control or challenge our stability, we need to have relatively unstable movements. Bless you. Damn it. All it took was a sneeze to concentration. So if we're trying to control motion for a long period of time, we're going to use controlled and stable movements. And then what we have is long duration. Now this can be manifested in a lot of different ways. In the rep range is going to be 12 to 20 repetitions. You can go a little bit more than that. We tend not to want to go less than that because it's just not a long enough time to challenge the metabolic pathways of your muscle endurance. How do you generate force for a long period of time? And you're just trying to control your body to do that. So that's the general goal of it. So when it comes to then strength endurance training, that is now move for a very long time. So we're going to be operating in supersets, but the supersets need to be adjusted in a way where the first exercise challenges the prime movers, but the second exercise challenges our stabilizers. And so when we train in a way that allows your stabilizer muscles to stay on longer than your movement muscles, it'll cause an adaptation where potentially, theoretically, this is just a fun way to think, that you can push your big muscles as hard as they can, and you will not lose form. So you will be less likely to witness a compensation or a change in technique or a change in form due to fatigue, which can increase the risk of injury. So if we're wanting to improve somebody's strength and how long they can be strong, we just want to make sure that their stabilizing muscles, the postural control muscles, have a longer lifespan than the movement muscles. Otherwise, if it was the other way around, if a person's stabilizers kicked out first and their movers could continue going on, then when those stabilizers kicked off, the person is going to be moving in a compensatory fashion, and that'll just be less successful from a performance standpoint, and it will be more problematic from a risk of injury standpoint. So that's just kind of how we're thinking about that. And in a power way, we looked at power. So power training has a mechanical specificity of both heavy and light. As a superset, the first exercise is going to be maximal strength to light up your nervous system. The second exercise is going to be an explosive exercise, power level, in order to increase the rate at which your nervous system is now going to be activating your muscle tissue. So that's the mechanical specificity when it comes to power. The neuromuscular specificity is going to be fast, and it'll be in typically a stable environment. And the metabolic specificity is pretty much going to be our creatine phosphate and our anaerobic glycolysis. So you can say, hey, this exercise is going to be power level, but only if it has these characteristics. If you end up doing things that are now too slow, let's say you're going to want to do some kind of jumping, instead of saying, I'm going to jump 5 times, that'll be a fast movement in a stable environment that is for a short period of time, high intensity. But if we say, I'm going to go ahead and do 100 squat jumps. So even though your body may be leaving the ground, over the course of that set of 100 jumps, which just sounds terrible, but 100 jumps, you will see that the person is slowing down. And if the person is slowing down due to fatigue, then the brain will remember slow. So it's very important that if we do a power level of an exercise, that the person is able to move fast enough to overload the speed at which they move. So that gets a little funky when we go into, well, what's the difference between maybe a power level of training and then using power level exercises for conditioning purposes. They'll have two different kinds of merits to it. One would be challenging your metabolic density as a specificity. The other one is going to be more biased towards your the velocity of the movement. So we'll have to choose wisely. Keep on pitching any kind of questions that you may have in the answer box, just kind of like, or in the question box, just to kind of give me a little lead to answer any questions that you may have. So now, I suppose lastly, we'll just put the OPT model up here. By the way, this marker smells fantastic. Up close. So phase, we have this level here, so this stabilization level. And then we'll have the strength level. And then the power level. So the three different levels of the OPT model represent the primary adaptations that we're looking to change. The phases will be a form of resistance training that support the overall adaptation. So in the stabilization level, we have one form of training that we would do to support that, which is stabilization endurance. This form of resistance training supports significantly the outcome of improving overall stability. Now, when it comes to strength, the result of our strength is going to be a compilation of a couple of different elements. One, it's going to be how much overall force your nervous system can cause your muscles to produce. So that would be called like the maximal strength. It's our peak force based on how much muscle is going to be recruited, your motor unit recruitment. So in just not to go in order or whatever. Phase 4 is max strength. It's your top speed, more or less, or your top horsepower. We also have hypertrophy. Which is going to be the fact that the amount of muscle you have is going to be influencing your potential force output. So bigger muscles, more possible force. We also have strength endurance. This is just more or less the duration that you can produce force, like your work capacity. So when we say like I'm doing strength training, we could actually ask sub-questions of, well, to increase your overall strength, are you trying to increase your 1 rep max, your absolute force output? Are you trying to increase your muscle mass to increase your strength? Or are you increasing the amount of time and the duration that you can be strong, or going in and out of these different things? So an annoying part about kind of learning about the OPT model is, I thought strength training was strength training was strength training, but now you're telling me there are 3 different types of strength training. And there are going to be more ways to do this than just this, but this is just how the OPT model is set. Now, when it comes to power, it's going to be pretty simple. Power is just going to be the rate at which your muscles produce force, which can manifest itself by increasing your extremity speed. And if that happens in your legs, you can jump or run faster. If it happens if you're in your upper arms, your upper body, that'll allow you to perhaps punch faster if you're in a striking sport, or throw faster if you are in a throwing or racket sport. So it's got a bunch of benefits to that. So there's only one form of resistance training that we do here as far as the CPT is concerned. If you were to go get your performance enhancement certification, they will extend that to maximal power, where even though this is power power endurance as supersets. And then here is just going to be typically where we do a lot of our Olympic moves. On the way other end of the spectrum, which I can't really draw here because I didn't budget my space, is going to be corrective exercise. You can kind of consider that phase 0. So in the CPT, there is a 5-phase model that can be used for the general population or general population goals. In performance enhancement, we can optimize our power by changing some of the acute variables in order to focus on speed and force output, not really worrying about too much endurance here. And in a lot of individuals, but in a very technical or relatively technical way, we can specifically improve movement impairments and a lot of the maladies that fall from that based on corrective exercise as phase 0. Well, there you go. I think we're going to go ahead and just kind of stop it there. Once again, this is just my first live stream. I didn't really have an outline to go over. I knew some of the 3 things that I wanted to hit, which is generally introduce the OPT model and what it is and what its meaning is for. How can we align that with the principle of adaptation, meaning a human being will change generally how they are challenged. And that's going to be from a couple of aspects like overload, specificity, and then progression, and then see if we can marry some of these concepts together. So how does this general adaptation syndrome and these principles of adaptation ultimately align with some of the characteristics and levels of the OPT model? If it made any sense, please leave some comments. If you have any further questions, feel free to leave comments, and I'll do more of these at your request. So thank you very much.